For more than 200 years, the U.S. has apportioned congressional seats and Electoral College votes based on population, including unauthorized immigrants and non-citizens. But President Trump could change that precedent. In his most recent piece for NPR, Hansi Lo Wang tracks some of the mixed signals the Trump administration is sending on this issue. And Hansi joins me now on set. Hansi, thank you so much for being with us. Explain exactly how congressional seats are currently divvied up.
Well, the census is conducted once a decade, and that's a head count required by the Constitution, a head count of every person living in the country. And the 14th Amendment says is a counting of the whole number of persons. And the Census Bureau has interpreted that to include every person living in the country, including unauthorized immigrants, so non-citizens and citizens, regardless of immigration status.
Right. And now, of course, you've reported extensively on the Trump administration's efforts to change the 2020 census to reveal immigration status or citizenship status. They were unsuccessful in that attempt. But what are you hearing now about what they might be doing with the information in the census?
Well, right. The question that the Trump administration wanted to add about citizenship, that has been blocked. There is no citizenship question on the 2020 census. However, the Census Bureau is going to release citizenship data based on the records of other federal agencies, including the Social Security Administration, the Department of Homeland Security, and that data will be released in time for redistricting officials. This is separate from congressional apportionment. This is for the drawing of maps of political voting districts at the state and local level that officials can do possibly based on eligible voters rather than total population.
And right now, the Trump administration is being a little bit cagey about this, right, when it's directly been asked by certain congressional leaders, correct?
Right. The Census Bureau director was asked during a recent House Oversight Subcommittee hearing just last month and provided very vague and sometimes non-answers during the hearing and later followed up with written statements. So what we now know is that the Census Bureau director confirmed again that the citizenship data will be released and that could be used for redistricting at the state and local level. And he was unable to comment about whether or not that citizenship data would be used for apportionment for determining the number of congressional seats each state gets.
Now, with just over 5 months until the beginning of the 2020 census, how important is it that we have an answer to this question, even though it's not directly related to the census itself?
Right. I talked to former Census Bureau directors, just the last one, John Thompson. He left in 2017. He said he's very concerned that the Census Bureau director cannot state clearly what the apportionment count would include, whether or not it would be citizens and non-citizens, and that with just months before this headcount officially starts, that the public does not know, that does not engender much trust in the public.
And is that expected to change the way people answer the census questions, or whether they answer it at all?
That's something we'll have to see, and I'll be monitoring that. But one thing to keep in mind is there is an active lawsuit right now in the state of Alabama. The state of Alabama and Congressman Mo Brooks, a Republican, is suing the Census Bureau to try to get undocumented immigrants excluded from the apportionment count. That's an ongoing case. We'll see how that turns out.
Now, I mean, it's worth mentioning that some of this can have political motivations, correct?
Well, there are observers here that see that if you were to exclude unauthorized immigrants from the apportionment count, presumably states with higher proportions of unauthorized immigrants could lose congressional seats to states with smaller shares of unauthorized immigrants. And that's part of Alabama's argument in this lawsuit. They are afraid of losing congressional seats to states with higher unauthorized immigrant populations.
Now, we know that the census question about citizenship, that's been answered. That cannot be placed on the 2020 census. But
Correct.
When it comes to the number of representatives apportioned to a state because of the number of people living in the state, the Constitution says persons, does not say citizens or non-citizens, correct?
That's right. The Constitution says persons. Originally made a distinction between freed people and enslaved people. That was resolved with the 14th Amendment after the 14th Amendment was enacted after the Civil War, so it's a whole number of persons. The argument made by the state of Alabama in the lawsuit in Alabama is that unauthorized immigrants, that the framers of the Constitution did not consider unauthorized immigrants to be included among persons.
But it has been specific before. Like you said, it was specific about slaves. It was also specific about non-tax-paying Indians, Native Americans. So it has made sort of specific exceptions in the past.
And that's why there is more than 200 years of precedence. And the federal government and later, obviously, the Census Bureau, which is in charge of the census, has interpreted that whole number of persons to include non-citizens as well.
Hansi Lo Wang, we thank you so much for coming to share your expertise with us.
You're welcome.